There are silences that come after pain. There are silences that come after betrayal. And there are silences that begin before a child even learns how to speak. Mine began on the day I was born. People said it was a beautiful day. They said the sun rose gently over the roofs, spreading gold across the small houses and dusty roads of the neighborhood. They said the morning carried the smell of rain from the night before, the kind of smell that makes old women smile and say that a child born after rain comes with blessings. They said my first cry was strong, not weak, not afraid. Strong. They said I cried as if I had entered the world, already fighting for my place in it. My mother held me close to her chest, tired but alive, broken by pain but shining with love. Around her, women moved with joy. Some whispered prayers. Some laughed softly. Some said I had the face of a child who would go far. Some said my hands were closed tightly, as if I was already holding something God had placed inside me. But in the middle of that joy, there was an empty space. A space nobody wanted to name too loudly. My father was not there. No footsteps outside the door. No nervous man waiting to hear if the child had arrived safely. No arms reaching to carry me. No proud voice saying, "That is my son." There were only women, prayers, and the silence of a man who should have been present. At first, I did not know that silence belonged to him. A newborn does not understand absence. A baby only knows warmth, hunger, touch, and the rhythm of a mother's heartbeat. I did not know that while my mother looked at me with love, her heart was also carrying questions she could not answer. She smiled for me, but behind that smile, there was a wound. Maybe she wondered where he was. Maybe she asked herself why he had chosen distance over duty. Maybe she hoped he would still come before the day ended. Maybe every sound outside made her turn her head, thinking he had finally arrived. But the day passed, then evening came, then night covered the house. And still, he did not come. That was how my life began, with love from my mother, blessings from others, and absence from the man whose blood ran inside me. Later, when I became old enough to understand, people told me different versions of the story. Some said my father was young and confused. Some said he was proud. Some said he had made mistakes and did not know how to face them. Some said life had carried him away. Some said he had his own suffering, his own battles, his own regrets. But when you are a child, explanations do not fill an empty chair. Reasons do not hold your hand. Excuses do not protect you from loneliness. All I knew was simple. I had a father, but he was not there. In the beginning, his absence was not something I could explain. It was something I felt without knowing its name. It lived in the way my mother worked harder than she should have. It lived in the way adults stopped talking when I entered a room. It lived in the way people looked at me with pity when they thought I was not watching. They would bend down, touch my head, and say things like, "Poor child." I hated those words before I even understood them. Poor child. Those two words followed me like dust on my feet. I was not poor because I had no dreams. I was not poor because I had no value. I was not poor because I lacked life. But in their eyes, I was poor because I did not have the one thing other children seemed to have naturally: a father who stayed. As a baby, I grew under my mother's care. She carried me when she was tired. She fed me even when she had little for herself. She smiled at me when her own eyes wanted to cry. She became mother, protector, provider, comforter, and shield. But no matter how much love she gave me, she could not become two people. She could not be my mother and my father at the same time. A mother can love deeply, but a father's absence still leaves a shape behind. It is like a missing wall in a house. The house may still stand, but wind enters from that side, rain enters from that side, fear enters from that side. And many years later, I would understand that people can see that missing wall from outside. Some people see a fatherless child and feel compassion. Others see opportunity, but in those early days, I knew nothing of that yet. I only knew my mother's arms and the strange heaviness that followed my name whenever adults spoke about my father. Sometimes, when women visited our home, they spoke softly with my mother. They thought I was too young to understand. Maybe I was. But children understand more than adults imagine. We may not understand words, but we understand voices. We understand when laughter is forced. We understand when silence enters a room like a warning. I remember the tone more than the sentences. A voice would ask, "Has he come?" Another would answer, "No." Then silence. Always silence. That silence became my first memory of him. Not his face, not his hands, not his voice, not his smell. Silence. As I grew from a baby into a small boy, I began to notice things. I noticed that other children had men who came home in the evening, men who lifted them in the air, men who called them by nicknames, men who scolded them when they misbehaved, men who walked ahead of them like shields when danger came near. I watched those men from a distance. Sometimes I pretended not to care, but something inside me would become very quiet. I would look at a child holding his father's hand, and I would wonder what that hand felt like. Was it rough? Was it warm? Did it make the child feel safe? Did the child know how rich he was to have it? Children with present fathers do not always understand the treasure they carry. They complain when their fathers correct them. They pull away when their fathers hold them. They roll their eyes when their fathers advise them. But I would have given anything for one full day of that. One day of being corrected by him. One day of walking beside him. One day of hearing him say my name like it belonged to him. But that day never came. Not then. Whenever I asked about him, the answers were careful. Some adults tried to protect me with soft lies. They said he would come one day. They said he was busy. They said he was far. They said life was complicated, but children are not fools forever. Eventually, far begins to sound like forgotten. Eventually, busy begins to sound like unwilling. Eventually, one day begins to sound like never. And that is how disappointment entered me. Not suddenly, but slowly, like water dripping into a cracked pot. At first, I did not hate him. How could I hate a man I did not know? Before hatred, there was longing. I imagined him many times. I imagined he was tall. I imagined his voice was deep. I imagined that maybe he had eyes like mine. I imagined that if he saw me, he would love me immediately. I imagined that maybe he was searching for me but could not find the way back. A child's heart is generous before pain teaches it suspicion. I made excuses for him before I knew what excuses were. Maybe he was sick. Maybe someone stopped him. Maybe he was working hard somewhere so he could return with gifts. Maybe he thought of me every night. Those thoughts comforted me for a while. Then life began to answer them with silence. Birthdays came and went. He did not come. Hard days came and went. He did not come. My mother struggled. He did not come. People asked questions. He did not come. And slowly, the father I had imagined began to change. The strong man became a careless man. The busy man became a selfish man. The lost man became the man who chose not to come. I did not know his story. I did not know his suffering. I did not know the mistakes that were already punishing him in places far from me. I did not know that one day he would return with regret in his eyes. At that time, I only knew my side of the wound. And every child believes his wound is the whole truth. The first time I truly felt ashamed of not having him was at a gathering where many families had come together. I was still young, but old enough to compare. Children ran everywhere. Mothers called names from one side. Fathers sat together, speaking loudly, laughing, giving instructions. One boy fell while running. His father rushed to him, lifted him, dusted his clothes, and told him not to cry. The boy stopped crying almost immediately, not because the pain disappeared, but because his father's presence was bigger than the pain. I watched them. I remember watching the father's hand on the boy's shoulder. That hand bothered me. It was just a hand, but to me it looked like protection, inheritance, identity, and strength. It looked like a roof over a child's soul. I looked around for my own roof. There was none. That day, something inside me bent. I did not cry in front of people. I had already begun learning how to hide my tears, but inside I asked a question that would follow me for many years. Where is my father? It was not just a question, it was an accusation. Where is my father when other children are being carried? Where is my father when other children are being defended? Where is my father when people look at me like I am incomplete? Where is my father when my mother is tired? Where is my father when I need someone to stand behind me? Nobody answered. Maybe nobody could. As I grew older, my father's absence became part of how people described me. Some people did not say my name without adding my situation. They would say, "That is the child whose father left." Not the child who is intelligent. Not the child who has dreams. Not the child who smiles even when life is hard. The child whose father left. It is painful when people reduce your whole life to another person's mistake. I had not left anyone. I had not failed anyone. I had not chosen that story. Yet I had to carry it. That is one of the cruel things about abandonment. The person who leaves may disappear, but the one left behind carries the explanation. My father's absence became my burden to answer for. If I was quiet, people said it was because I lacked a father. If I was angry, people said it was because I lacked a father. If I made a mistake, people said it was because I lacked a father. If I dreamed too big, people said I was trying to fill the emptiness of a father. Everything returned to him. Even his absence had power over my presence. And that made me angry. But before anger became fire, it was confusion. I wondered if I had done something wrong by being born. Children often blame themselves for wounds they did not create. I wondered if maybe I was not good enough to make him stay. Maybe if I had been born different, he would have remained. Maybe if I had cried less, smiled more, looked more like him, or needed less, he would have chosen me. Those thoughts are heavy for a child, too heavy. But abandoned children carry adult questions in small bodies. My mother tried to protect me from that weight. She never wanted me to feel unwanted. She poured love into me with every strength she had. But pain has many doors. Even when a mother closes one, another can open outside the house. People talk, children hear, communities remember, and absence speaks even when everyone else is silent. At night, I sometimes imagined him walking toward our home. I imagined hearing footsteps. I imagined someone knocking. I imagined my mother opening the door and freezing. I imagined a man standing there with tired eyes, asking to see his child. In my imagination, I would run to him. I would not ask questions. I would not accuse him. I would not mention the years. I would simply run, because the child in me wanted a father more than he wanted justice. But morning always came, and the door remained closed. So I learned to live with two versions of myself. One version hoped, the other version prepared to hate him. Hope was softer, hatred felt stronger. Hope made me wait, hatred made me stand. Hope made me vulnerable. Hatred made me feel protected. So slowly, without realizing it, I began choosing hatred. Not because I was evil, but because anger felt less painful than longing. Longing says, I still need you. Anger says, I never needed you. And I wanted desperately to believe I did not need him. But the truth was buried deep. I needed him every day he was gone. I needed him when I took my first steps. I needed him when I asked my first questions. I needed him when I saw other children with their fathers. I needed him when people looked at me with pity. I needed him when my mother was tired. I needed him before I even knew how to say the word father. His absence became the first teacher of my life. It taught me that love can be missing. It taught me that blood does not always mean presence. It taught me that a child can be born into a family and still feel like something important is unfinished. But it also taught me to observe, to remember, to feel deeply, to recognize pain in others, to understand that a wound can become either poison or wisdom, depending on what we do with it. At that time, I did not know it would become wisdom. At that time, it was only poison. The silence after my birth followed me through my earliest years. It sat beside me when I ate. It walked with me on the road. It stood behind me when people asked questions. It entered my dreams and waited for me when I woke up. I did not yet know that the same man whose absence wounded me would one day return. I did not know that he would come back broken, humbled, and repentant. I did not know that the father I blamed for my suffering would one day become the cornerstone of my success. I did not know that the empty place in my life would not remain empty forever. All I knew was that I had been born into a world where my father was missing. And because he was missing, I began life with a question in my heart. A question no child should have to carry. Why did he leave me? That question became the seed of my pain. It became the beginning of my anger. It became the shadow over my childhood. But every story of redemption begins somewhere. Mine began there, in a small house, in the arms of a tired mother, on a day people called beautiful, with a newborn child crying strongly into the world, and a father who was not there.
Subscribe now to not miss episode 2. The story is just beginning. Don't miss out.